Objection, my lady. That is complete hearsay.
A man accused of faking his own death and fleeing across the pond to Europe to avoid rape charges makes a stunning admission in court for the very first time since his legal saga began.
And today, Mr. Rossi does not deny that Arthur Knight and Nicholas Rossi are in fact the same individual.
Nicholas Rossi's case made international headlines after the former fugitive fled the U.S. to Scotland, where he adopted a new accent and a new look. But what he was running from were serious allegations, a pair of rape charges stemming from years earlier in 2008. He's charged with raping his former girlfriend after an argument in Salt Lake County, Utah in 2008, and he's charged with raping a 21-year-old woman in Orem, Utah the same year. But his identity in that case didn't become clear until 2017 due to a backlog of untested rape kits. According to investigators, that same year, Rossi left the U.S. for Ireland first, using the name Nicholas Brown and using an Irish driver's license, but police say it was a fake ID using a stolen document. In 2021, the then fugitive was arrested in Scotland after being recognized at a Glasgow hospital during treatment for COVID. But Rossi, who at that point was going by Arthur Knight Brown, fought extradition back to the States for 3 years, claiming it was a case of mistaken identity and that he wasn't even Nicholas Rossi. Then in August of 2023, a judge in the United Kingdom ruled Rossi can be extradited to the States and dismissed the mistaken identity claims as plausible and fanciful. In January, he was extradited back to Utah, and during a hearing after his return to the U.S., he still claimed to be an orphan named Arthur Knight Brown.
Are you Mr. Rossi? Are you Mr. Rossi?
No,
You might have to take that off just to talk so that she
lady.
can
No,
hear you.
lady.
Is that a yes? Having a hard time.
My name is Arthur Knight Brown.
I think I'm going to have the jail restate what he said. Having a really hard time hearing him.
What is it?
My name is Arthur Knight Brown.
He says his name is Arthur Knight
Brown.
Brown.
Arthur Knight Brown. Brown.
I can't hear. You want to have him state his name and date of birth?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
we can't hear him at all. Can you ask him, can you please state your name and date of birth?
You get a little closer.
Lady, my name is Arthur Knight Brown. My date of birth is 22nd of the 11th, 1986.
Okay,
I think we're having a problem with understanding who this person is.
this is not number 36.
Your Honor, we've got him as Nicholas Rossi, but he's saying his name is Arthur Knight Brown.
Oh, that's one of the AKAs.
This individual has been extradited, and he has not admitted his name or birth date accurately, and so I don't think we're going to be successful on that today either. It's also known as.
Objection, my lady. That is complete hearsay, and I would ask your ladyship that the prosecution show cause for why they proceeded to allow
Mr. Knight, I'm going to...
whilst I had an appeal pending in the Supreme Court.
Months later, during a hearing in August, Rossi appeared in court for a preliminary hearing ahead of his rape trial. But the judge during that hearing addressed Rossi as his alias, Arthur Knight.
All right, welcome everybody. We have our attorneys here. Mr. Knight is here. Good afternoon, Mr. Knight. Counsel, you ready to proceed?
State is ready, Your Honor.
Okay.
But during his latest hearing this week, Rossi made a shocking admission and confirmed he is in fact Nicholas Rossi and that he and the alias Arthur Knight Brown are the same person. The stunning reveal came after Rossi admitted to changing his name because of alleged threats made against his life. Before fleeing to Europe, Rossi initially lived in Utah and eventually moved to Rhode Island, making a name for himself as a vocal critic of the state's Department of Children, Youth, and Families. While on the stand in Utah this week, he dropped the accent and claimed the threats on his life were related to his work to reform the foster care system.
The steps necessary to ensure that I was kept safe and later on to keep my family safe.
According to reports, the judge temporarily closed the courtroom so Rossi could identify the source of the threats. The defense argued for Rossi to be released on bail, but the judge denied the defense's request, citing the obvious: Rossi is a flight risk.
The thrust of the state's argument is that there is clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Rossi is likely to flee the jurisdiction of the court if the individual is released on bail. Having carefully considered the evidence presented, the court finds that the state has shown clear and convincing evidence that that is true. The disputed facts surrounding Mr. Rossi's departure from the United States and his return under extradition demonstrate that his likelihood to flee the jurisdiction of the court if released on bail is very highly probable. The court reaches that conclusion based on the following facts. At a time when the Alahverdian Foundation was under investigation for fraud, Nicholas Rossi departed the United States. He had a conversation with an FBI agent in which he indicated that he chose the country of his destination because Ireland would not extradite him. The FBI agent confirmed the departure of Mr. Rossi on an American Airlines flight in 2017. He left using a U.S. passport and disembarked in Dublin. The testimony is that on January 9th, Mr. Rossi was granted a sex offender reduction by the state of Rhode Island. The very next day, it was announced on the Alahverdian Foundation website that Mr. Rossi had cancer. Later in February, an obituary was posted for Mr. Nicholas Rossi, again in February of 2020, indicating that Mr. Rossi had died and had been cremated and buried at sea with only his wife and children as witnesses. 7 days before the obituary was posted, Mr. Rossi or someone posted on his social media account that he had married Miranda Knight. In fact, Mr. Rossi had not died. He continued to conduct his affairs in Europe. Mr. Rossi denied emphatically being Nicholas Rossi and claimed that he was Arthur Knight. Ultimately, that extradition process resulted in him being returned to the state of Utah, returned to the United States, and then to the state of Utah, where it was confirmed, and this is in the preliminary hearing transcript, it was confirmed that the DNA swab from the defendant was for Nicholas Rossi, and that DNA match is confirmed, and today Mr. Rossi does not deny that Arthur Knight and Nicholas Rossi are in fact the same individual. It is true that Mr. Rossi currently faces health circumstances that may make his flight from the United States more difficult, but I'm not persuaded that it would prevent that from happening, that those conditions would prevent that from happening. He has his wife in the UK that is providing him money on a periodic basis. That money can assist him in his potential flight. He has no ties to the state of Utah of any kind. He's facing a rape charge in Salt Lake County. These are strong incentives to flee the jurisdiction, and he has demonstrated his ability to do that in the past. For all of these reasons, the court finds that the state has met its burden of proof. I will order that Mr. Rossi be held without bail.
Now, with Rossi forced to remain behind bars until trial, it doesn't appear he'll have a chance of returning to Europe anytime soon. Let's bring on now criminal defense attorney Kesia Early to get her take on what went down in court. Now, Kesia, thank you so much for joining me today. At this point, I never thought Nicholas Rossi would ever come clean and reveal his true identity, but he did so in court. Were you surprised at all by his admission?
Not quite, because eventually he had to give his true identity because everyone else knew who he was. I just think that he had good legal counsel. I believe that his attorney really just had a conversation with him and told him, listen, you know, either you give up your true identity or we're not going to have a fighting chance for you to get pretrial release. So it was clear, it was obvious. So they came up with this elaborate story, but we already knew who he was. It was just a matter of time.
And did you buy Rossi's claims at all that he was threatened, which is what kind of made him go into these different aliases and monikers? Do you buy that claim?
Absolutely not. First of all, if he was threatened, if he was afraid of his life, the first thing you do is to reach out to law enforcement. You don't create an alias. You don't fight extradition for 3 years, I believe. You don't do everything to elude law enforcement and prosecution. And he did everything opposite for a person who is in fear, for a person whose life is in danger. So not only did that not coincide with his story, it made no sense whatsoever. So I know that it's not believable, and I'm pretty sure the judge saw right through his lies, which is why his bond bail was denied.
And this case has pretty much been ongoing from 2008 when the offenses occurred to now 2024, with the added layers of the rape suspect fleeing to another country and living under these aliases. Have you ever seen a case like this at all before?
Well, not with the similar facts and patterns, but typically once time goes by, it usually makes it harder for the prosecution to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. But in this instance, evidence of flight is typically evidence of guilt. So he fled the country, he fought extradition, he didn't want to come back to be prosecuted. But it's the time that it took to test the DNA. Back then, I believe the DNA crime labs were backlogged. So it took them several years from the date of the incident, I believe in 2008, up until 2017 to not only test the DNA, but come up with an exact match. So you have hardcore DNA evidence that links him to the crimes. And then you have him fleeing the country. And then you have this bogus story that I'm pretty sure the jury will see right through. But we oftentimes see these cases where time goes by, and sometimes the victims in a case, they don't want to open up those old wounds. So they may not be willing to come forward. But there's two victims in this case. So hopefully one will come forward. One will be strong enough to say, he did this to me. And the prosecution will be able to secure a conviction.
And can the prosecution also use this for 404B evidence or bad acts evidence against him during trial, as far as, him fleeing to another country and him using these different aliases? Can that be admitted during this rape case?
It absolutely can be, but it's the job of the defense attorney to file the appropriate motions to argue against that evidence coming in, or if not all of the evidence, some of the evidence not coming in. Our job is to keep the state at its burden, to make sure they're proving their case, but to also make sure they're following the law. So is the prejudicial value it greatly exceeds the probative value? And if it does, then the judge may not let this evidence in. But I do believe not only is his flight evidence coming in, his multiple stories are coming in, and he may not have a choice but to testify. But in this case, DNA evidence speaks louder than his testimony. So this looks like an inevitable conviction.
Now, you're a criminal defense attorney, and say you are Nicholas Rossi's attorney. What type of defenses are you going to be using during these two separate rape trials? Because here you have one of the victims was Rossi's former girlfriend, and the other went to police, did a rape kit that came back positive, and that DNA matched Nicholas Rossi. What are you going to do if you're his defense attorney?
I think his easiest case is the ex-girlfriend or the previous girlfriend, because his defense would be it was consensual. She was just mad at me. She screamed rape. And especially if all you have is his DNA, you don't have any struggle marks, attacks, nails, anything to show that there was a fight, then it's going to be hard to show that, you know what, this was a rape. Now, for the second alleged victim in this case, if this was no connection whatsoever, an absolute stranger, and she can show, in addition to the DNA, that she fought for her life or that where it occurred, if there's additional evidence to corroborate her statement, it's going to be easier for the state to secure conviction. So it's really about the evidence, attacking the evidence, also attacking the credibility of the alleged victims. Not every victim is a victim. I try a lot of cases, whether it's sexual assault, battery, where boyfriend, girlfriend, or female will utilize the law as a sword as opposed to a shield of protection. So you want to attack their credibility when they're on the stand, cross-examination, and hopefully the jury may either end with it being a not guilty verdict or at best a hung jury.
And given these two separate cases, these two separate rape cases, do you think it's a clear-cut case in either instance for the prosecution here?
I never say any case is a clear cut. There's been times that I tried a murder trial that was caught on surveillance. To the prosecution, it could have looked like a clear cut case. He clearly pulled the trigger, but the law provides justification. And I'm not saying he was justified in his acts. No case is ever that clear. No case is ever a slam dunk. You really have to have two zealous advocates, one for the state and one for the defendant, really upholding the law, fighting for the law, and making sure evidence that should not come in stays out, and the evidence that needs to be exposed comes in.
Yeah, and I guess we'll see kind of how this all will play out in the future with these upcoming preliminary hearings and then the eventual trial if that does come to fruition. Casey, I want to thank you so much for your time today. But before I sign you off, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, he needs to take and heed advice of counsel. Oftentimes, defendants, they think they know everything. They think they know their case better than us. But we went to law school. We were trained in the rules of procedure. We were trained in advocacy. We were trained to uphold the rule of law. So if he does not take any advice, take the advice of counsel.
All right, Casey, again, thank you so much for your insight today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Nicholas Rossi pleaded not guilty to first-degree felony rape. His next court appearance is slated for October 29th. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.